it's been so hard to predict what they're going to do. But from everyone I've spoken to and everything I've read, it looks like, this is sort of a brief respite as they're regrouping, and then it's going to get a whole lot worse for Kyiv. They're going to, continue shelling and bombarding and bombing and kind of throwing as much as they can out at it. I guess the question for me basically is what the resources of the Russian military actually are and how long they can keep this up. They're already asking China for supplies. They're already conscripting people in Russia. They're already having, it does not seem particularly well organized. And while there's a lot of power there, I don't know how long they can do that for, but it seems like they're going to do it as long as they can.
Lastly, Chernobyl. What is your sense as to what is going on with Chernobyl? I don't sort of understand what the idea is with that.
So I think, I don't want to speak too soon. I think Chernobyl is kind of sort of like red herring. The nuclear stuff is not as big of an issue there. My
understanding is it's not as dangerous as
as Zaporizhia. No,
I think at this point, because it has been 40 years.
It's been dormant for ages. There's a massive metal enclosure over the reactor itself. There were some issues where they were the fighting there has kicked up radioactive dust, and the power was out at the facility or something like that. Obviously, if they drastically mismanage it, or someone starts dropping bombs on the old Chernobyl power plant, itself, that's bad. That could be an issue. I think Chernobyl's significance more so is just a conventional strategic one. It's a big sort of area of built up with roads and stuff through Pripyat and stuff like that. That is, it's right on the border with Belarus, directly north of Kyiv. So it's just an area that the Belarusians and Russians want to control, so that they can control, as I've said, these main arterial roads and these highways that let them project force and get armor and tanks and stuff immediately down to the outskirts of Kyiv. So I'm if we're worried about nuclear risks in the country, I'm much more worried about the power plant down on the Dnieper River. I think it's a little bit southwest of Zaporizhia than I am of the old dormant stuff in Chernobyl.
All right, let me add one more question, and this is, I guess, is sort of a big one, and I apologize, but for pretending the last question was the last one. There's two dynamics here, right? One is that the question of, is there an off ramp for Putin that is, he's sort of on the highway already, but is there an off ramp where, that this endeavor where he can go, and so this was always about just getting independence for these these regions in Donbass and to the extent that there isn't, and it really becomes a quagmire for Putin, right? Because we've already talked about there is going to be there essentially controlling Ukraine is not going to be something that seems like it's going to be viable for any time in the future. That I wonder how much of an impetus there is at one point when there is a realization that this conflict cannot be avoided. And we've talked about, the idea of arming people because they're not going to stop in terms of killing, and that the Russians. How much of that is were there war hawks in your mind in this country, in NATO, broadly speaking, who said, this is an opportunity, one that we didn't necessarily court, but we didn't think would arise. But this is an opportunity to, in many respects, this is how the Soviet Union ended with Afghanistan. This is an opportunity to end, maybe to do a Russian reset type of thing. How much of that do you think is out there? I
think there's definitely people that there's probably definitely some horrible people out there that were hoping for that situation beginning, and unfortunately for everyone in Russia and everyone in Ukraine, I think that's already happened. I think the Russian state as we know it is finished. I don't think that there is. I don't really see an off-ramp for Putin. I guess he could say like our limited military operation, because that's how they've been phrasing it, has concluded. We've secured independence and freedom for the Russian-speaking peoples of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. We're pulling back from Kiev after sending a strong message to the Nazi government in charge of Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera. These are the new borders of Donetsk and Luhansk. Will abide to a ceasefire based on those. Maybe. I hope that happens. But I honestly don't. I don't know. It wasn't a logical or rational decision that caused them to invade in the first place, right? And I think the consequences that have been leveled against Russia have been disastrous, both militarily and economically. I think there's a lot to critique, as well as to the West's use of broad sanctions that are going to harm the Russian economy in general and the Russian people, as opposed to much more targeted and focused sanctions. We didn't sanction Putin himself immediately because like world leaders are, technically a hands-off zone or something like that.
Appropriate.
Yeah. And we're only now getting around to like sanctioning a whole bunch of the oligarchs and stuff
after
like that.
They've had the opportunity to store, whatever it is, convert all of their holdings into diamonds and put it into some, safe somewhere or something, whatever.
Exactly. I think there's a lot to critique about the U.S. response to that, but I think the response as it has been from the U.S. and the Western and the European community has just absolutely thrashed the concept and notion of Russia and Russia as a state. And I don't, especially if this war drags on for years and things like that, and they keep sinking resources that they don't have into this, it's going to break them. And I'm sure that there are war hawks in Washington that are pleased about that. Personally, I absolutely don't think it would be a bad thing if Putin's regime came down. But I wish that there were a way that could happen that would have less fallout on, Russian people.
Human suffering.
Exactly. But I honestly, I don't know. I don't see an off-ramp to that. And I especially don't see an off-ramp to this conflict that doesn't end up with a huge amount more suffering being leveled on the primary people that are experiencing it, which is the Ukrainians. It is bad for Russians that, but like having your bank accounts all messed up and McDonald's closed down is not the same thing as, cluster bombs in your living room. That's not to excuse the US's actions in certain ways or say that like sanctions are good, but there's always levels to the pain that people experience in situations like this.
Jack Crosbie, thank you so much. Very happy, obviously, that you made it back safely. A really impressive work while you were over there. There's a piece we didn't even get to it, but I would encourage people to go check out the piece you wrote on the Discourse blog. Was it today or yesterday? I don't know, about NATO's ability,
Friday, I think,
to absorb immigrants. Or refugees, I should really say, that if we want to help mitigate the human suffering in some way, that's the place to do it. We'll put a link to that, obviously. And nice to have you back on the AM Quickie. There you go. Right. Yeah. Slide right back in. All right, man. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.